Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my commentary today. In the long arc of strategic history, there are moments when innovation silently crosses a threshold and the global framework tilts with it. The unveiling of America's Aegis Ascent missile defense constellation is one such moment. A development so sweeping, so structurally transformative, that it recalls the most fateful decisions of the early Cold War era. It represents not merely an enhancement of defensive capacity, but a redefinition of how global influence is exercised, constrained, and potentially abused in the nuclear age. Aegis Ascent is at its core a simple yet revolutionary proposition: neutralize the hostile payload not in mid-flight, but in the first few seconds of its ascent, before its trajectory stabilizes, before its decoys deploy, before its warhead disappears into the shadows of space. To do this, the United States plans to deploy roughly 600 satellites in low Earth orbit, each equipped with kinetic interceptors capable of slamming into a rising missile at nearly 27,000 kilometers per hour. A collision so violent that no explosive charge is needed, pure impact becomes the weapon. Velocity becomes the shield for Washington. This is framed as an act of prudence, a technological rampart meant to protect a turbulent world from catastrophic miscalculation. But to the rest of the world, particularly nuclear-armed states, it raises a more unsettling possibility that the United States is seeking not equilibrium but strategic invulnerability. A defense that eliminates an adversary's ability to retaliate does not merely protect, it dominates. It shifts the psychological foundation of deterrence from mutual vulnerability to unilateral superiority. History teaches us that such shifts rarely pass quietly. When one nation acquires what appears to be an impenetrable safeguard, others do not celebrate. They accelerate. The arms race of the 21st century may not take place in silos or submarines, but in orbit, among constellations of interceptors, decoys, surveillance webs, and counterspace weapons. Aegis Ascent may yet prove to be a safeguard for humanity, but it may also be the moment future historians mark as the beginning of the race for supremacy beyond the atmosphere, a race born not of aggression, but of apprehension. What distinguishes Aegis Ascent from every missile defense system that came before it is not its sophistication nor even its orbital ambition, but its underlying strategic philosophy. For more than 7 decades, the global security order rested on a harsh but stabilizing truth. No nation, not even the United States, could guarantee its survival in a nuclear exchange. This shared vulnerability, the grim symmetry of assured mutual destruction (AMD), acted as a brake on hubris, a guardrail against catastrophic miscalculation. Aegis Ascent challenges that symmetry at its very core by intercepting missiles in the boost phase. Those first fragile seconds after ignition, the United States seeks to do what no power has ever achieved: nullify an adversary's ability to retaliate. Even the most advanced ICBMs, hypersonic gliders, and solid fuel ballistic missiles are vulnerable during their launch phase. If that vulnerability can be reliably exploited from orbit, then deterrence itself is no longer mutual. It becomes conditional, depending on whether Washington allows another country's missiles to take off. This is the essence of what many analysts already call the strategic nullification, the capacity to deny another sovereign power the option of nuclear response. Aegis Ascent thereby represents a profound conceptual shift. American defense policy is no longer content with surviving a first strike. It aspires to make the very notion of a first strike obsolete. In principle, this seems morally compelling. A world in which missiles can be intercepted before they wreak devastation is a world safer for all. Yet in practice, this asymmetry carries a darker implication: a power that cannot retaliate, cannot deter, and a nation stripped of deterrence lives in chronic insecurity, its political leadership haunted by the fear that its ultimate safeguard has been rendered meaningless. This is why Russia and China read Aegis Ascent not as a shield, but as a lever, a silent restructuring of the global balance of power. Their anxiety is not paranoia, it is the rational response of states that see their nuclear doctrine being eroded by orbital technology. If the U.S. can disable its arsenals at will, then Washington gains not just defense, but influence, the ability to pressure, coerce, or dictate terms in international crises without fear of escalation. For Washington, Aegis Ascent is framed as an insurance policy, a last line of defense in an age of unpredictable adversaries and advancing missile technologies. But in Moscow and Beijing, the system is perceived not through the lens of American reassurance, but through the lived historical memory of encirclement, containment, and strategic vulnerability. To them, Aegis Ascent is not a shield. It is the quiet demolition of the nuclear equilibrium that has constrained great power war since 1945. Russia's reaction is immediate and visceral. Since the early Cold War, Moscow has depended on the survivability of its nuclear arsenal as the ultimate guarantee against Western intervention. Its strategic doctrine, its military investments, and even its global posture are built on the premise that no adversary can eliminate its retaliatory capacity. Yet, Aegis Ascent aims precisely at the weak seam Russia has long acknowledged but never expected the U.S. to close: the boost phase, those first seconds when a missile glows white-hot against the sky, vulnerable and slow. If that phase becomes reliably interceptable, Russia's deterrent may shrink from formidable to fragile. Moscow must then ask the most unnerving question: if America can erase our ability to respond, do we still possess autonomy in the nuclear age? The fear is not of war today, but of coercion tomorrow. A United States that believes itself invulnerable may be more assertive. A Russia that feels exposed may be more reactive. Both tendencies magnify risk. China faces an even more profound dilemma. Unlike Russia, Beijing maintains a comparatively modest nuclear arsenal built on the doctrine of minimum credible deterrence. China has never sought parity. It has sought sufficiency, enough weapons to ensure that no adversary could contemplate a first strike without risking devastating retaliation. But Aegis Ascent undermines the foundation of that doctrine. If the U.S. can intercept Chinese missiles in their infancy, then China's minimal arsenal is no longer sufficient. It becomes obsolete. This realization triggers a cascade of strategic anxieties in Beijing. Must China dramatically expand its nuclear stockpile? Should it accelerate hypersonic development to evade boost phase tracking? Will it need space-based systems of its own to counter or blind Aegis Ascent? Does it risk being permanently subordinated to American strategic superiority? These are not theoretical debates. They are existential assessments, and they lead toward one direction: a rapid, determined effort to restore parity through expansion, innovation, and weaponization of space. Thus, Aegis Ascent inadvertently unites Russia and China in a shared perception of vulnerability, pushing them closer together strategically, politically, and technologically. The very system meant to insulate America from future conflict may therefore deepen the cohesion of America's principal competitors, accelerating what historians may come to call the birth of the orbital arms race. The tragedy is not that America seeks safety; all nations do. The tragedy is that in seeking absolute safety, Washington may compel its rivals to develop capabilities they would otherwise avoid. Fear, not ambition, becomes the engine of escalation. And once fear governs great power relations, diplomacy struggles to keep pace with technological change. If this deep dive into strategic history and technology is resonating with you, I encourage you to hit that like button and subscribe to join our community. We explore the profound shifts shaping the future every week, and your support helps me dedicate more time to these complex issues. The moral dilemma at the heart of Aegis Ascent is not rooted in its technology, but in its implications. The project presents itself as a defensive breakthrough, a humane endeavor to shield populations from nuclear devastation. Yet history cautions that when one nation acquires an impenetrable shield, the effect is rarely stability. It is fear, And fear in the realm of nuclear strategy is the most dangerous catalyst of all. Aegis Ascent aspires to deliver the United States something approaching strategic immunity. But invulnerability is not a neutral condition. It transforms the psychological architecture of global politics. A nation that no longer fears retaliation may even unintentionally conduct itself with greater confidence and sharper demands. Meanwhile, nations that suddenly see their own deterrence compromised feel the opposite, an acute existential vulnerability that reshapes their worldview. This is the ethical paradox. A system intended to protect humanity could provoke the very insecurities that endanger it. For Russia and China, the arrival of Aegis Ascent implies that their survival, not simply their prestige, could one day hinge on the decisions of an American president. Whatever Washington's intentions, no sovereign power can accept a world in which its nuclear arsenal, the final guarantor of national survival, can be nullified by a foreign constellation of satellites. The moral question then becomes, can a nation ethically pursue absolute security when that pursuit threatens the security of all others? This dilemma echoes past strategic revolutions. When the United States unveiled the first atomic bomb, it believed it was ending the war. Instead, it triggered an arms race that lasted half a century. When the Soviet Union launched the first satellite into orbit, the Western world saw it not as a scientific triumph, but as a prelude to orbital militarization. Aegis Ascent sits squarely in that lineage, a breakthrough perceived simultaneously as salvation and provocation. The ethical stakes rise further when we consider the automation of decision-making. Aegis Ascent requires near instantaneous response, detection, prediction, and interception occurring within seconds. Such speed pushes command authority from human deliberation toward algorithmic calculation. In a crisis, leaders may find themselves observers rather than decision makers, watching automated systems escalate or intercept based on code. This subtle yet profound shift undermines the human judgment that historically prevented catastrophe in moments of confusion. Moreover, Aegis Ascent incentivizes adversaries to seek asymmetric responses. If their missiles can be neutralized, they may experiment with cyber sabotage, anti-satellite weapons, orbital debris fields, or even exotic technologies designed to blind or overwhelm the U.S. constellation. In other words, the quest for ultimate security may open a Pandora's box of new instabilities, some technological, others political, all perilous. Aegis Ascent represents not only a technological milestone, but a moment of profound political reckoning. It forces the international community to confront an old truth resurfacing in a new domain. When a state gains a decisive advantage, especially one that touches the nuclear realm, the global system either adapts through diplomacy or fractures under the weight of mistrust. The United States, in unveiling this system, has placed the world at a crossroads. What comes next will determine the shape of great power relations for decades. There are, in essence, two paths before us. The first is a new architecture of restraint, a recognition that space, like the oceans and the Arctic before it, must be governed by principles that limit the most destabilizing forms of militarization. This would require unprecedented cooperation among Washington, Moscow, and Beijing, nations whose relations today are marked more by suspicion than by trust. Yet, history shows that even bitter rivals have managed to carve out moments of responsibility. The anti-ballistic missile ABM Treaty of 1972, flawed as it was, prevented a runaway arms race for 3 decades by acknowledging a simple fact. The pursuit of perfect defense is the shortest road to perfect instability. A modern equivalent, one that addresses orbital interceptors, anti-satellite weapons, debris-creating systems, and autonomous intercept algorithms, could preserve the fragile equilibrium that keeps nuclear war unthinkable. The second path is darker. Russia and China, feeling their deterrence threatened, may commit to rapid nuclear expansion, new classes of maneuverable hypersonics, or space-based countermeasures designed to blind or overwhelm Aegis Ascent. Smaller nuclear states, watching the great powers destabilize the balance, may pursue their own hedging strategies or seek alliances with powers promising protection, fragmenting the global order into camps defined not by ideology but by vulnerability. The orbital domain could fill with dueling constellations, debris, jammers, directed energy systems, and kinetic interceptors. A crisis in Taiwan, Ukraine, or the Middle East could suddenly spill upward with the first shots fired not on land, but in the silent vacuum above the Earth. In such a world, the margin for error becomes perilously thin. A misinterpreted launch plume, a malfunctioning satellite, a false positive in the tracking system, any could trigger escalatory pressures that leaders cannot stop in time. Aegis ascent demands reaction in seconds, not hours. The faster the systems become, the slower diplomacy feels, and history reminds us that wars often begin not from intent, but from misunderstanding. Anchor line. A crisis in Taiwan, Ukraine, or the Middle East could suddenly spill upward with the first shots fired not on land, but in the silent vacuum above the Earth. In such a world, the margin for error becomes perilously thin. A misinterpreted launch plume, a malfunctioning satellite, a false positive in the tracking system, any could trigger escalatory pressures that leaders cannot stop in time. Aegis ascent demands reaction in seconds, not hours. The faster the systems become, the slower diplomacy feels, and history reminds us that wars often begin not from intent, but from misunderstanding, a terrifying notion when considering systems designed for near-instantaneous engagement. Yet amid this uncertainty, a moral argument emerges with clarity. Technology cannot replace trust. A stable international order has never been built on invulnerability, but on mutual understanding, dialogue, and verification. If the United States uses Aegis ascent as leverage to compel negotiations, offering transparency, constraints, or even joint monitoring frameworks, the system could become a catalyst for a new era of arms control diplomacy. But if it becomes merely another instrument of unilateral advantage, the world will move inexorably toward an orbital arms race that no nation, including the U.S., can truly control. The decisive question then is not whether Aegis ascent works. The question is whether humanity can govern it, whether great powers can rediscover the restraint that has prevented catastrophe for 8 decades, whether leaders will see that a shield built for one must not become a sword pointed at all. The future of strategic stability now depends not on the ingenuity of engineers, but on the wisdom of statesmen and on the courage to build peace, not only on Earth, but in the skies above it. Thank you for watching. If this deep dive into the complex web of global security and next-generation technology has illuminated the risks and rewards of this new era, please consider hitting the subscribe button. Your support allows me to continue exploring these crucial and often overlooked topics, helping us all navigate the strategic shifts that define our future. Don't forget to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below.